There is a book that kings had burned, that popes condemned, that rulers across 5 centuries called the work of the devil himself. And yet, every single one of them read it in private. That contradiction should tell you everything. The book wasn't dangerous because it was wrong. It was dangerous because it gave ordinary people the exact same map that powerful people were using to navigate the world. And a population with that map is a population that is extraordinarily difficult to govern. So they didn't debate Machiavelli, they didn't refute him. They did something far more elegant. They made sure you never took him seriously. They attached his name to villainy. They turned Machiavellian into an insult. They put him in the footnotes of history, close enough to seem included, far enough to seem irrelevant. It worked on most people, but you're here, which means something in you already suspected the footnote was a cage. Introduction. Here's the hidden code this video will decode. The world operates on 2 sets of rules. The first set is the one you were taught. Openly, publicly, in classrooms and churches and corporate onboarding sessions. Work hard, be honest, play fair, trust the system. The second set was never written on any whiteboard you sat in front of. It lives in the decisions of people who shape economies, institutions, and narratives. It operates silently beneath the surface of every negotiation, every hierarchy, every social structure you move through daily. Machiavelli documented the second set, and for 500 years the people who benefit most from you not knowing it have made sure his name sounds like a warning rather than an invitation. Tonight we accept the invitation. These are the 8 secrets powerful people never wanted you to find, and the psychology behind why the hiding worked so well. Lesson 1. The curriculum that was never an accident. You probably assume the gaps in your education were administrative, budget constraints, too much to cover, shifting priorities across different governments and school boards. But here's what most people never realize. The architecture of what you were not taught is just as intentional as what you were. Every system of organized education since ancient civilization has carried a dual function. The stated function: prepare citizens to think. The unstated function: prepare citizens to cooperate. These 2 goals are not always aligned. A population trained to think too independently, too clearly, too structurally about how power distributes itself becomes a population with demands, and demands are expensive. Machiavelli observed that men are driven by 2 primary forces: the desire to acquire and the fear of losing what they have. He noted that systems survive not by satisfying the first desire, but by expertly manipulating the second fear. Think about that in the context of your own life. How many of your most significant decisions were driven not by what you genuinely wanted, but by a quiet, ambient terror of losing stability, approval, or status? Your mind was shaped inside that fear, and the curriculum you received was designed not randomly but architecturally to keep that fear more available than the clarity that would dissolve it. The most efficient cage has no bars you can see. Lesson 2. The performance you were never told was happening. You believe you can read a room, you observe people, read expressions, notice patterns. You feel reasonably confident in your social perception. Machiavelli would tell you that confidence is precisely where your vulnerability lives. He wrote that the great majority of mankind is satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities, and that the few who see beneath appearances will not dare to contradict the many. Here's the mechanism operating beneath that observation. Every social environment you inhabit, professional, political, familial, has a front stage and a backstage. The front stage is what is performed for you. The language chosen carefully, the emotions calibrated for effect, the position stated for strategic rather than sincere reasons. The backstage is where actual decisions happen. You were taught to engage with the front stage as though it were real. You were taught to respond to what people say rather than to the structure of incentives behind what they say. And what makes this even more fascinating? The people running the performance are not necessarily cynical. Many genuinely believe their own front stage. The performance becomes sincere through repetition, but sincerity is not the same as accuracy. What Machiavelli gave his reader was not cynicism. It was a second pair of eyes, trained to look for the backstage in every room. Once your mind learns to ask what does this person need from this interaction before processing what are they saying, you will never engage with a social environment the same way again. The performance was always happening. You simply weren't told to look for the director. Lesson 3. The invisible architecture of your own beliefs. Here is a question most people never seriously ask themselves. How many of your convictions did you actually construct? And how many arrived pre-assembled? Your sense of what is possible, what is realistic, what is acceptable ambition versus dangerous arrogance, what kind of person deserves success versus what kind is simply lucky. Did you derive those from evidence and experience? Or did they settle into you the way sediment settles, slowly, invisibly, without a moment you could point to? Machiavelli understood something that behavioral science has since confirmed in laboratory conditions. The most durable form of influence is not coercion. It is the shaping of what people perceive as natural. When the limits of your imagination feel like the limits of reality, no force is required to contain you. You contain yourself. You look at people who operate differently and call them reckless or lucky or morally compromised. You protect the belief system that protects the system. The deeper truth is that this is not weakness. It is an extraordinarily efficient design. Your beliefs feel like yours because you feel them with genuine conviction. But the origin of a belief and the intensity of a belief are completely independent variables. You can feel deeply, authentically, and sincerely. A belief that was placed inside you by forces you have never examined. Recognizing that is not nihilism. It is not the destruction of your values. It is the beginning of owning them. Slightly warmer tone. Before we go deeper. If what you've heard so far has made you see something differently, consider subscribing to Decode. This channel exists for exactly this. Decoding the hidden operating system behind human behavior, power, and the mind. And drop a comment below. Tell me which of these lessons is hitting closest to home. I read every single one. Now, back to the code. Lesson 4. The strategic cost of having no position. You are taught that staying neutral is wisdom, that withholding judgment, seeing all sides, refusing to plant a flag. These are marks of maturity and sophistication. Machiavelli called this one of the most quietly destructive positions a person can occupy. He wrote that neutrality makes enemies of both sides. The winner who wanted your support and the loser who needed it. Neither trusts you. Both understand correctly that you are optimizing for your own safety rather than standing for anything with actual weight. But here is the psychological dimension that goes beyond politics. Your mind was systematically trained toward epistemic softness. Not because softness is wise, but because a population without strong convictions is a population without strong resistance. When you've internalized that certainty as arrogance, you become uncertain about everything, including your own perceptions, your own instincts, your own right to make claims about the world. And uncertain people are extraordinarily easy to redirect. What makes this a paradox is that the training came disguised as virtue, open-mindedness, humility, nuance. These are genuinely valuable qualities, which is precisely what made them effective vehicles for something else entirely. Machiavelli never argued for recklessness. He argued for clarity, knowing where you stand, being honest about what it costs you not to stand there. The person who knows their position and holds it under pressure is not an extremist. They are simply someone the system cannot easily move. Lesson 5. When goodness becomes the extraction mechanism. This is the lesson that will be most uncomfortable, and it will be uncomfortable specifically because it will feel wrong, which is itself part of the mechanism. You were taught that virtue is its own reward, that honesty, generosity, and self-sacrifice are inherently noble, that good behavior consistently maintained produces good outcomes, and in genuine relationships between people of genuine goodwill. This is largely true. But Machiavelli made a clinical observation about environments of power. A man who insists on acting rightly in all circumstances will come to ruin among so many who do not. This is not a call to cruelty, it is a call to consciousness. Here is the hidden mechanism. Predictable virtue in a system populated by strategic actors is not admired, it is mapped. When you always tell the truth, people learn where the edges are and work around you. When you always follow the rules, people know exactly which rules to exploit while you comply. When you always absorb the sacrifice, people learn that the sacrifice is reliably available. Your goodness without awareness becomes a resource others schedule withdrawals from. The real mechanism Machiavelli is pointing to is not the abandonment of values. It is the difference between chosen virtue and automated virtue. Generosity you give deliberately is a reflection of your character. Generosity that is extracted from you through social pressure, obligation, or the fear of being seen as difficult. That is not virtue. That is a system running a program on you. You don't stop being good. You start noticing the difference between giving and being taken from. Lesson 6. The gravity principle. Machiavelli's most misunderstood observation is the one about fear and love. He asked whether it is better to be loved or feared, and answered that while both are desirable, if forced to choose, fear is more reliable. This lands wrong on modern ears. It sounds like an endorsement of intimidation. But here's what most people never realize about what he actually meant. The fear Machiavelli described was not terror. It was gravity. The understanding communicated not through threats but through consistent behavior. That there are real consequences to betrayal. That promises carry weight. That your time, your trust, and your presence are not infinitely available at zero cost. You are taught to make yourself lovable, to be agreeable, to smooth over friction, to make yourself easy to be around, to prioritize harmony over honesty, accommodation over self-respect. What you were not taught: how to be someone whose boundaries have actual mass. The psychological mechanism here is that warmth without weight produces a specific kind of relationship. One where you are appreciated in the way a comfortable chair is appreciated. Present, useful, taken for granted. Gravity is not coldness. It is not hostility. It is the quiet, consistent demonstration that you are a person of substance, that engaging with you has real terms, and those terms are maintained. The people who command genuine respect in any room are rarely the most accommodating. They are the ones whose approval means something precisely because it is not automatic. You don't manufacture that through threat. You build it through the patient, consistent refusal to be weightless. Lesson 7. The window that doesn't come back. Machiavelli believed that fortune, circumstance, timing, luck governs roughly half of everything that happens in a life. The other half he attributed to virtu, not morality. force of character, the capacity to recognize a moment and move inside it before it closes. Here is the paradox your mind was never shown. Chronic caution is not safety. It is a different kind of risk, one with no visible downside until the accounting finally arrives. Machiavelli described fortune as a river. When it floods and destroys, it is not because the flood was unforeseeable. It is because no one built the channels and embankments during the calm seasons. The people who shape their own outcomes do not control fate, but they do something fate cannot do alone. They prepare the terrain in advance. Here is what makes this deeply personal. Every period of your life has a specific configuration, a particular combination of energy, relationships, circumstances, and open doors that exists only in that form, in that season. Your 30s are not your 40s. This year is not next year. The conversation you could have today with someone who still has their door open to you, that conversation has a shelf life your mind prefers not to acknowledge. The people who waited for certainty, for the perfect moment, the complete plan, the guaranteed outcome, are not safer than the people who moved. They are simply people whose stories were written by the hesitation rather than by them. Machiavelli said fortune favors the bold. Not because boldness is always rewarded, but because inaction is always a choice. And every choice, including the choice to wait, has a cost that compounds silently in the background. The window in front of you right now, this specific configuration of your life, will not return. What you do with that information is the only thing left that Machiavelli could not decide for you. If this video gave you a new way of seeing, subscribe to decode. Every video on this channel is built to decode one more layer of the hidden operating system behind human behavior. And tell me in the comments, which of these 8 lessons changes something for you? Which one landed hardest? I'll be in there reading. And sometimes the most interesting part of the video is the conversation that happens underneath it. Closing. Here is the code that runs beneath all 8 lessons. You were not kept from Machiavelli because he was immoral. You were kept from him because he describes the world with a clarity that makes compliant behavior harder to maintain. The curriculum was architectural. The performances were deliberate. Your beliefs arrived pre-shaped. Your neutrality was trained into you. Your virtue was mapped and scheduled. Your warmth was leveraged for its predictability. Your caution was compounded into lost time. None of this required a conspiracy. It required only a system that perpetuates itself by producing people whose vision stops exactly at the system's edge. Machiavelli saw past the edge. He wrote it down. He paid for it with exile, torture, and erasure from the curriculum you received 500 years later. But the book survived, because truth has a specific quality that power finds difficult to fully extinguish. It keeps being true, whether or not anyone is allowed to say so. You've now read what they preferred you didn't. The only question that remains, the one Machiavelli himself would ask, leaning forward with that cold and patient look, is what you intend to do with it.